Hi, and welcome to Intro to Forensic Science. Forensic science in general is the study and application of science to matters of the law. So we take scientific inquiry and scientific data and we apply it to the law. So if somebody is arrested, we use our science to determine if there is proof of fact. So our job includes providing accurate data, very thorough information to all levels of decision makers. Typically, we will start out by talking to the detectives, and then from there, you may get called into court to testify, to back up your decisions, and go from there. The basic services provided by the crime lab. This is for a very basic crime lab. You typically will have some sort of physical science unit, which deals with chemistry, so toxicology stuff, physics, which would be blood spatter analysis, and also bullet trajectories, and then geology, which would be soil. The biology unit deals with DNA. Firearms and ballistics will deal with identifying the types of guns used in a crime. Document examination will look at handwriting and also forgeries. And then the photography unit is the one that is used the most because they will take pictures at every single crime scene. The entry-level photography position is one that is open quite often because what the people see on a daily basis can be very brutal. And it can be very taxing on a person. Other services that can happen with a crime lab will be a specific toxicology unit, latent fingerprint units, so developing invisible fingerprints, polygraph unit, so lie detectors, voice print analysis, evidence collections, and engineering. The crime labs themselves can be federally run, state-run, or run by the local government, or you can even have one that is a private consulting business. There is a business down on like 32nd Street in Greenway that offers DNA paternity tests and also DNA testing where they have questions for the courts. So they can hire that company to test DNA to compare to the DNA that's been collected. And that's from the defense side. The prosecution side will always use the labs that are provided by the state or provided by the government, so federally, state, or local levels. There are multiple federal crime labs. When we think of federal crime labs, we automatically think of the FBI because they are the one that is used the most often. They have the largest crime lab in the world. And some of the stuff and the technology that they use is so far ahead of what we have at the state and local level that it is amazing. You have the DEA, which is also a major crime lab. They deal with anything that is drug-related. So when you see those giant drug busts on the news, the DEA is involved with it. They have 7 major labs throughout the United States on both coasts and then along the borders. And then they investigate just any major drug activity. So when they're bringing it in from outside or if they're moving it around inside the United States. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms deals with just that. They have 3 regional labs and then a file research lab. And they deal with anything dealing with alcohol, tobacco, firearms, weapons of any amount, explosives because they use gunpowder, and then organized crime as well. The United States Postal Service has their own crime lab, which everybody thinks the post office, why would they have one? But it's any crime involving mail. So if people commit mail fraud or they place bombs in packages and send them to people, like the Unabomber in the picture, the United States Postal Service will actually investigate it first, and then sometimes they will call in the FBI or other crime labs. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has their own lab. They deal with anybody that is hurting animals. So people that are poaching or, killing animals that they are not having a license for. If they are importing endangered species, which happens more often than you would realize. And any crimes that happen inside national parks. The Department of Homeland Security is the newest federal crime lab. They were made after the events of 9/11. They also contain the Secret Service lab in there, so they keep the borders protected, and then they maintain the Secret Service lab, which deals with counterfeiting and obviously the protection of the president. They were actually originally made for counterfeiting, and then once Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, they were asked to help with protecting the president and the vice president. The Department of the Treasury, they will maintain a lab for the Internal Revenue Service, and they will specialize in question documents, fraud, wire fraud, all sorts of things. The job of a forensic scientist. So the main job of a forensic scientist is to study the different types of evidence found at a crime scene. So they will use Lockhardt's principle, which is that every contact leaves a trace, to help determine what the most important areas are to look at first. They identify what it is, and then they attempt to find out where it came from. So their goal is to find out an individual source, if they can, for each piece of evidence. They have to be ready to testify as an expert witness at a trial or a hearing. They have to be able to defend their data. They are responsible for everything they collect. They can't go into court and speak about somebody else's collection. They have to speak about their own. They perform scientific research, and they also will train others in the area. So when they have new recruits and stuff like that, they will actually start training them. So the background of a forensic scientist, the main thing that if you want to go into forensics, you want to have a degree in some sort of science. So biology, microbiology, chemistry, organic chemistry, any of those will get you into a very good position. After that, you can have experience in independent study, so doing internships in different places. And then if you would like to further go through, you can get a forensic science master's. There's a lot of certifications out there for forensic science, or to become a forensic specialist. I have a friend who is a NICU nurse, and she got certified as a forensic nurse so that she could speak and testify at cases and be a independent contractor, or be hired in as an expert to analyze cases of child abuse with infants. So there's all sorts of routes that you can take in forensic science. The top 6 important people and places. These all have to deal with different aspects of forensic science. So Sir Alec Jeffreys is the first guy that used DNA in a court case. So he applied it and was able to overturn a conviction because the DNA did not match. And that was in 1984. So it was very recent in the timeline that we started using DNA. Bertillon identified people using body measurements until the William West case, which we will get into in fingerprinting. Carl Landsteiner is kind of the blood guru. He found out everything about blood, so that we have different blood types, that we have RH factors. Lockhart, like I said before, formulated his principle that every contact leaves a trace. Edward Henry developed a classification system for fingerprint identification so that we didn't have to search through every single fingerprint card. And then the FBI Crime Lab. They opened up out of a single room in Washington, D.C. and they had one agent at the very beginning. And now they have multiple crime labs. We have an FBI office up at 7th Street in Deer Valley. If you drive by, it has a giant fingerprint on the sign. And Charles Apple was their very first agent, and that was back in the 1930s. The Lockhart Principle, like I said, this is the founding principle of forensic science. And it is that whenever two objects come into contact with each other, there's always a transfer of material. So no matter what, you will leave something at a crime scene and you will take something with you. Maybe invisible to the naked eye, it might not, but you will always have something. So it tells us that we always have to look for the evidence. And Lockhart was pretty cool. He was kind of like the Sherlock Holmes of the turn of the century. And he was called into other countries like Germany, England, Spain to look at cases and to analyze them. The scientific method that we use, we have 6 steps. It's very similar to the scientific method that you see in biology, but ours is more geared with making sure that our data is accurate, so that we can make a verified analysis and we can determine if a person is actually guilty. If you convict somebody that is not actually guilty of the crime, you will ruin their life and you will ruin your career credentials. And that is it. Thank you for listening.